So we just want to know a little bit about you. We want to know about your time that you spent here in the Cornwall Mines. So we'd just like to have a conversation about that. So if you first could tell us, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was actually born in Lebanon County, Annville. My dad was in the service at the time, so he didn't see me until I was 16 months old.
Oh, wow.
And then when he came home from the service, we moved to Lebanon where my grandparents were. Went to school there at Harrison, which is no longer there, for first through third grade. And then we moved to Tunnel Hill Road, so I had some more history with the tunnel. It was only a block away from our house, and that was our playground. And then went off to college, graduated from Lebanon High in 1962, went to Mansfield University, got my degree in elementary ed, came home, had a job in Palmyra. My wife in the meantime was teaching, and she had graduated half a year ahead of me. So she was teaching in Cornwall Lebanon School District. We both got jobs in Palmyra, so we moved to Palmyra, and from Palmyra we moved to Hershey, but still taught in the Palmyra School District. And I retired from teaching in 1997.
Very good.
In between there, I also had my master's degree from Millersville in elementary ed. So that was basically my background.
Okay, well, there's lots of teachers around here as well. Now, you say that your father was in the service. Do you remember what branch he was in during World War II?
He was in the...
and I assume it was World War II that you were
right,
saying.
World War II.
Okay.
He was a navigator bombardier in the Army Air Force.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was in the European or the Pacific
He
theater?
was in the European, Italy. He had
Okay.
bombing missions over Italy. I'd never known. He was very quiet, like a lot of veterans, about his experiences in the war. And finally got him. I was doing a family history. I finally got him to tell me, and he whips out this notebook, and he has all his moves, everything that he did during the service. So it was quite interesting.
All right. So what did he do before and after the service?
He had worked for Bethlehem Steel at the Lebanon plant. He was in payroll finance. Then when he came back from the service, he had an interruption, I think about 3.5 years. Came back, still in the payroll department, and eventually worked his way up, and he was in charge of the payroll and data processing center. He went to school to learn all the wiring that had to go on with the IBM machines in those days.
Okay, so...
And the cards that had to be punched. I think he had 20 girls that were key punch operators.
Oh, wow. That's great. Now, you said that he had worked at Bethlehem Steel. Did you have other family that worked for Bethlehem Steel then as well, or?
My younger brother worked in the electrical department for about 10 years, I think.
Okay.
And that was it.
Okay. When did your father retire from Bethlehem Steel?
He retired in 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he had a long tenure then with the company?
Right, he did, very long.
Okay. And you said his name was Gerry
His
as well?
name was, yeah, it was Gerald C. Boltz.
Okay.
My own, Gerald M. Boltz.
All right. So you told us a little bit about your career and where you went to school and everything. One of the things is, and why we asked you, is that of course you had worked in the Bethlehem, in the mines here at Cornwall,
Right,
for Bethlehem
yeah,
Steel. Can you tell us a little bit about your time working in the mine? How did that come about? What did you do?
Well, since my dad was a Bethlehem Steel employee, during the summer, Bethlehem Steel would hire college students to replace those miners and other workers that were going on vacations, and we'd be assigned different jobs. I was interviewed for the job by Mylan Lupinski.
That's a name we know.
Right, yeah, right over here in the office on the hill.
Okay.
And
so that's the stone building
stone
right
building,
now.
right.
Cornwall
Cornwall
Manor
Manor.
is using as storage at the moment.
Right.
Okay.
And my first year, I was assigned to number 4 mine, and we were underground for a couple weeks, and then we were told we were going to be moved to the concentrator plant, and we had to clean up where the elevator, or the, I shouldn't say elevator, but the not escalator either, the, maybe Mike can help me
Conveyor
out
belt?
there. The conveyor belt, yeah,
Okay.
would be bringing iron and crushed stone over from number 3. And of course, we'd have to clean up the off-fall. We'd walk the length of that, shovel it onto the conveyor belt.
Oh, so you were doing all that by hand?
Yeah, we were doing it by hand.
Okay.
We were true laborers. Never leave that shovel. Always bring it with you.
Okay.
So every day we'd have to clean up.
So you said that you were doing this with other college
Other
students?
college students.
So were these people that you knew before the job, or were these folks that you just met when you got to the job?
Just met when we got the job, yeah.
Okay.
Hadn't known them at all. And right now, if you'd asked me to tell you their names, I wouldn't remember who
That's
they
been a
were.
few years ago.
But we all got along. We were all in the same boat. We're all laborers. We're all good workers. And the next couple of years, I was moved over to number 3 mine, and I was always day shift. I was on the production and development crew, and I guess we were day shift because they always were bringing concrete in, and they couldn't bring concrete in at night and have those things going on at that time. So, but again, we were muckers, and we cleaned up the areas alongside of the track that ran underground where they had the jitterbugs and the engine. We'd keep the ditches free so that the water could flow, because they were pumping gallons and gallons of water out of there every day. And occasionally we had to work weekends where we would clean the shafts up and down where they were bringing the ore. If it fell out and was littering the shaft that went underground, we'd be cleaning that. And that sometimes would take us, we'd work a Saturday and a Sunday until we did 600 feet or however many feet there was. We'd work our way to start at the bottom, and they had a car there we could dump the ore into it. And,
Well,
someone would
you're
haul
talking
it.
about working underground, that had to be considered very dangerous, wasn't it? So did you get any sort of safety training or anything, or did you just show up one day, they handed you a shovel and said, do this, kid?
No, they did give us some training,
Okay.
not a whole lot, but
Okay.
we were assigned, we were given our helmet and our lantern, and I'm trying to think, we may have even gotten boots, or we had to buy our boots. I'm not quite sure about that, but we all
Okay.
wore boots halfway up to the knee, mucker boots.
Oh, I can imagine.
But I never felt, we were always working in the concreted area of the underground, and I never felt not safe.
Okay. Did you encounter, when you worked here, was there anyone that had gotten hurt? Did you know anyone that had gotten
We
hurt?
heard stories of those people, that some of the miners that got hurt, that were on second and third shifts, that were taking the ore out,
Okay.
and were in the fingers pulling the ore out into the cars, or got hurt when there was a landslide inside one of the offshoots of the fingers.
Okay. So, talking about that, you talked about your miner's helmet, your light. Were you wearing eye protection, hearing protection, anything like that, or?
Probably should have been wearing hearing protection.
Okay.
It caught up to me, because I now have a pretty good case of tinnitus.
Okay.
But there were a lot of other things that could have caused that. But there was a constant rattle underground. As they had the pipes, they would be pumping down the concrete, and you could hear the stones rattling against the pipe as it would go past you.
Yeah,
And
because I guess that was tons and tons of material that was moving all the time.
be pouring every day. They would pour concrete on them, form up and pour concrete. The next day move the forms and pour concrete again. But, and I worked with a fella called Wimpy. Not many people could work with him, and they experimented.
Everybody had a turn.
Everybody had a turn, and I ended up with working with him. But he ran the jitterbug, and he would, little train car with a scoop in the front, and I would shovel it onto the scoop from the side, or he would scoop it up if there was some in the middle of the tracks, and we would go down the shafts and clean up as much as we could, and to keep that water going. And usually we'd finish early afternoon, and then our job was to haul the blasting caps and the dynamite. They would send down at a certain time, about 2 in the afternoon. They would send that down, and I would always tell my wife that I loaded enough dynamite to blow up the world. But we'd unload 50, 60 boxes, put it in an overhead shaft with the blasting caps. And every day it was the same number of boxes that we would unload. Because our crew was out in some of the other area, that in the end of the shafts they were developing and they were drilling, and they would always blast at the end of the day. So at 3 o'clock or thereabouts, we would get the signal, and we would all have to go into the lunchroom, and you'd hear boom, 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 and they would be blasting and knocking the ore out, and then the next day they would come in and clean that up again and get rid of it.
So you heard the blast more than
Yes.
you felt them in the lunchroom, or
Well, you could feel them.
you could feel them too? All right.
Yeah,
That had to be a little strange the first time you experienced that.
it was. Yeah.
Where was the lunchroom?
Lunchroom was as soon as you got off the skip. I think it was off to the right, if I remember, and all the mining, everything was off to the left, where they would bring the cars and dump them to take up. We'd always walk past that on our way to our jobs. So it was interesting.
So you would spend your entire shift then underground when you were working underground?
Right, yeah. I think it was maybe 55 degrees, 50 degrees underground
All year long?
all year long. And you'd come up on a 90-degree day and, wow, a blast. and then go into the shower room and put your hat light in the locker and put on your shorts or take a shower, depending how dirty you got. But you always had to wear a lot of clothing, so you didn't really sweat underground.
Well, that's true, being that cool. So that had to be a really different thing. I mean, you know, most kids today, when they get a summer job, they might be working in fast food or a restaurant or something like that. I mean, you're working in a mine.
In a mine.
So was that something that you asked your father about, or was it something that your dad said, I think you ought to?
I think you ought to, yes.
All right.
He always wanted us to work, because I started, my first job was scraping concrete off of, for a Minnick, a bricklayer, scraping concrete off of scaffolding.
So how old were you
And
when
then
you had that
repainting it.
job?
I was 15,
Okay.
and I worked, did that for a year, and then between my junior and senior years in high school, a friend of mine got me a job at the Gretna Timbers as a dishwasher.
Okay.
But that proved pretty nice job, because I continued to work after that as a waiter, which was always nice, because you had people coming in, you could get nice tips and cook steaks out at the grill,
Okay.
and did some food prep. So that was my summer job. Would be sometimes I would work in the mines on Monday through Friday. Saturday I would go to Gretna Timbers and I'd work a wedding reception or work as a waiter in the evening.
So you were really hustling during the summer.
I had to pay my own way through college, so
Okay.
I needed the money. the mines were good pay. I got
Was that generally thought of in the community? Everybody thought that that was a good job or good pay for?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
For a kid, I was getting $2.65 an hour, which was pretty good money at that time.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah. And later on, in the early 70s, another friend of mine got me a summer job working at Crystal Pools, installing swimming pools, and eventually another friend and I subcontracted. They asked us if we'd subcontract, and we would put in above ground swimming pools. We'd do 40 or 50 above ground pools this summer.
Wow.
So I've always been a worker.
Okay.
I haven't shied away from it. But
Well, that's very good.
I don't know if
Quite
the mines helped me that way or not, but you know, that was my background, I guess.
Well,
My dad was there to.
Well, did you ever feel that if school didn't go well, that you knew you always had a job at the mine, so that was a little extra pressure?
I knew that I was never going to have to work in the mines to make a living. I saw the men that were working there. I mean, they were good men, but I just didn't want to have a laboring job like that.
Could you see that the physical labor was taking a toll on them physically?
Yeah, they were tired at the end of the day, and I see a lot of them were older and ready to retire, and didn't exactly have the best of attitudes all the time. But
I could understand that. I could understand that.
we'd hear the conversations in the lunchroom.
So is there a memorable experience that you'd say, or kind of a most memorable
Probably my
experience?
most memorable was at number 3 mine when Wimpy and I finished our work. He said to me, "Would you like to see the open pit?" So I still don't remember how we got there, but he wound our way. I think we went up to the 500 level, and there was an opening from the 500 level into the open pit. And we walked out, crawled over some rocks, and there we were, surrounded by this gigantic hole. You know, when you're 500 feet down, looking up, pretty impressive, and looking out. And I always remember that, and going out into that.
So he must have really taken a shine to you if you said that other folks didn't get along quite as much.
We got along pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you ever know what happened to him then? Or?
I don't know. He was probably in his 30s to early 40s. So I'm assuming, you know, when the mine got flooded, he left and maybe got another job someplace. I don't know.
Okay.
Didn't really have contact with too many of the people. I did go back to one reunion they had a number of years ago. They had it over here at Quentin at the fire company grounds, where they had Bethlehem Steel employees and some of the miners come, talk to some of the people, and nobody I knew anymore, because you know, a lot of them were hired after I was there.
Was that the last reunion?
It may have been, because they were talking about doing it again, but there were not a lot of people attending.
Yeah, because we actually have in our collection flyers and things that they were doing that as an annual event for many years.
Yeah.
So that would make sense that that would be the last
It
one.
may have been, would have been probably late, maybe 2010. I think we were living here 2010, 2011,
Okay.
2012, somewhere in there. I was hesitant, but then somebody encouraged me to go. I said, well, maybe you might see somebody. You know. But,
But yeah,
we talked about the mines and what their jobs, etc.
Tell us about, you mentioned when we were not recording that you had a 3-point job. What was that all about?
Yeah, they had point jobs. I guess there was 3-point, 6-point. I don't know if they went higher than that, if there was a 9. But the more points, the more money you made. So the fellas that were the actual miners, they were probably 9-point jobs. And they try to work their way up. A lot of them were framers, some of them were drillers, drilling the shafts. And then those guys that would come in early in the next morning, they take the blasted rock out. And then you had the guys, I think most of them knew how to handle the blasting caps of the dynamite. Some of the dynamite was in sticks and some of it was like sand you'd pour into the hole that they would drill. They showed me one time and the wires that they would bring back to the plunger. They actually had a plunger down there with the wires that would go to the blasting caps. But, it was interesting how they got the ore out of that underground.
And you mentioned there was some teasing going on, especially for the college summer students?
Yeah, there was a guy, he was rather short and obnoxious. He would always have something to test the college kids' knowledge. And it was always some obscure thing that he thought, he knew we weren't going to be able to answer. And then, of course, would razz you when you didn't know the answer. You know, why are you going to college? You don't know this, you don't know that. And he would even get after some of the other miners, too.
What was his name?
I think it was Robert Payne, Bob Payne.
Aptly
named.
aptly named.
Yes, yeah, he was aptly named. But he, afterwards, he had a little truck farm down 322. And I used to stop him, though, if I would be out of school at that time. But later on, we'd stop and get some produce or some flowers from him. And he remembered me.
You didn't ask him questions, did you?
No, I didn't ask him any questions.
So this kind of goes along with that. So how well did the other workers get along with each other? I mean, you talk about people, that sounds like that was more good-natured,
Right, yeah.
driven. I assume that went on quite a bit with other folks as well.
I think most of them got along pretty well. There were a couple that you could see there was a little tension, and it was probably over something that happened underground. Maybe it put them in danger, or because these guys, when they would crawl out those shafts and up those fingers, and they would also blast if they got a large rock would get stuck in there. I guess you would call it a finger that went out from the shaft. If a large rock got stuck, they'd have to blast it, and then they would set their dynamite, crawl down, and I'm not sure how they did that, if they had a fuse or if they had a plunger, and then blast that rock so that the ore could come down, and they would scrape it into their little hole over the main shaft into the railroad cars that would take it to the area where they dumped it and brought it up above. So that could cause some problems if somebody was not doing their job and putting somebody in harm's way. Because there was each finger had a man he had his little chair, and he would operate his scraper that would bring the ore. There was cables that went back, and they would scrape it forward, and there was this guy and this guy and that guy. So the man operating the train would park it so he had a car to fill, and then if they had more, he'd bring another car. Then he'd go to the next guy and fill his car. Then they would walk up those shafts and check out their fingers and see if they had some more ore to bring down.
So those are the slushing drifts where they were scraping the
Right,
ore.
yeah.
And then the train was in the haulage drift.
Right.
Did you use those terms when you were underground, or you just knew where you were?
I knew where it was, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I don't think I used those terms.
No. Did you have different terms for the?
Because we really weren't involved. Those guys came in on you know, the
Early in the
second
morning.
and second, well, they were on the
Oh.
second and third shift.
Okay, night shifts,
Yeah.
yeah.
We were always day turn, because they had to bring supplies down, and the concrete, and they probably couldn't get concrete in the evening or at night, so we were always day shift, which was nice, you know. I enjoyed day shift.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, were there any like foremen or bosses that you remember, or were there ever problems with those folks, or?
I don't remember any of the bosses, no.
Okay.
Once I was assigned to Wimpy, and that's where
That was
I stayed.
it.
I stayed there for 2 years with him. And I don't know who worked with him after I left. So somebody got the job.
Did you ever hear any talks about the union or anything like that, or, between management and labor or anything of that nature?
There was probably some, but
But that wasn't-
being a college kid, I
Okay,
wasn't really
You weren't concerned?
probably concerned with it.
okay.
They all seemed to be doing all right. A lot of family members, 'cause they would talk about their uncle or their father who worked in the mines, and kind of typical of the ore mines or the coal mine situations of Pennsylvania.
There was multi-generational, lots of
yeah,
family.
lots of family members. Don't really remember. There was family Chernick or Chernoff or something.
Chernich.
Chernich.
Yeah.
There were a lot of Cherniches.
Yeah, there's even one that still lives here in Miners Village. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's amazing to me the amount of families, of course, that drew in. By the time that you were working here in the 1960s, you would have had families that would have lived here for 200 years that had worked in and around Cornwall and the mines, and then you would have had some families that were here, maybe 50, 60 years at that time that would have come soon after the 20th century. So did you ever hear anything amongst different ethnicities or different, did the Hungarians maybe say things to the Italians or anything like that underground?
I don't remember anything like that.
Okay.
My job, I was kind of isolated from the main group of the men, because we'd clean the shafts, we'd do this one, we'd do that one, do another one, and then we'd haul the dynamite. If we got done early, we'd sit and wait for the shift.
So you
to
did
end.
your work.
Right.
You did your work, and
We
that
did
was
the work
it.
and got on with it.
So when you were down underground, did you ever collect any rock specimens that were there? Did you ever see anything kind of interesting?
I would see them bring rock specimens to the lunchroom,
Okay.
but I never kept any.
Were there certain miners that you saw do that quite often?
There were some, they had the pyrite or the fool's gold, or
Okay. So do you think?
don't remember all the names of the minerals, but they, if they'd come across a particular thing.
But like, was it a certain guy that they collected? Like, there would
I
be.
think there were a couple that collected,
Okay.
because they would tell me this was worthless, basically, the fool's gold or the pyrite.
But it looked nice.
Yeah, it looked nice.
And we have some over there in our
Yeah,
case.
I had looked at those earlier.
That worthless stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew at the time they were taking, we always heard stories of taking gold out, and that there was enough gold to pay for the operation.
So that was something that you were hearing?
I was hearing that day, that was in the 66, 67.
Okay. So that was something the workers were saying, that enough gets hauled out of here?
Yeah, and they would say about the copper and basically the copper and gold they would talk about.
Ever talk about the silver as well, or not so much?
Didn't hear anything about silver, no. They would get excited about the gold. And
It's easy to get excited about.
Yeah, maybe some of them even, probably put that in their lunch bucket and came out with it, but don't know. We all had lunch pails, and
Some came back a little heavier than they
some
left.
came, yeah, they would bring things out. I know that.
Okay. So I think it sounds like I know the answer to this, but I ask it. So after completing your mining summer jobs, were you ever interested in continuing your career as a miner?
I was not interested in continuing as a career as a miner, but I did have the opportunity. I don't know who referred me to Mr. Lipinski, but I was, Bethlehem Steel had what they called a loop program,
Yes.
and I was recommended to go into the loop program. I had an interview, I think it was here, by a couple other gentlemen, but they were looking for somebody with a business degree, and of course mine was in education, so didn't get into the loop program. But
Okay.
that would have been a nice opportunity. I would have had to decide that versus teaching. So I did 30 years of teaching, and probably considered myself lucky because Bethlehem Steel went under, and I would have been out of a job.
Absolutely. So it was the right choice for you
So
then
I
as
guess
well.
I stayed and enjoyed my educational experience for 30 years.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything else that you could think of in your time mining? I think one of the things that I find really interesting, you were there when it operated, and today when you come here, it's now 50 years after
Right,
operation.
yeah.
So I think it's really hard for a lot of people to look at what's left and get the scale, and to know how many people were working there, and kind of how that had a ripple effect throughout the county.
Right,
That
we
it
had-
seemed like everyone either was related to a miner, knew a miner, had some sort of business relationship with a miner. And the fact that that's gone now, I think is kind of a real hard thing for people that have moved into the area, that they just don't quite understand how far reaching this was. I mean, when you would go out with your friends and things, did you see guys that you worked with? I mean, how common was it that you were bumping into people from Bethlehem Steel?
Occasionally I'd see people that I'd recognize from underground, but a lot of them had with the helmet and
They look different in the daylight.
the earplugs, and the shirts and things up over or their hoodies up, or up over their helmets. You didn't always recognize them, and some of them would get pretty dirty with what they were doing. But no, I've since I'm over in the woods at Cornwall Manor, the entrance to number 3 mine is basically almost across the street from our entrance, and I have walked up to where number 3 was, and just to get an idea of what it looks like now. The foundations are still there. The washroom foundation, the floor is still there, and I guess an office building floor, and there's a concrete or stone pillar where the conveyor belts had been. I think there's one standing.
Mhm.
And just came over to the edge and looked down. Of course, it's filled with water now, and it looks quite different than it did at that time. Because when we go down underground, you'd see it right there as you're going down. But ask a couple neighbors. I just talked to maybe it was Bruce that I talked to. Said, has he ever been up there on top of the hill, which is interesting. And with the concentrator gone,
Oh, absolutely.
that was a big building, and number 4 mine was up a little higher. But,
So you talked about the water. That brings up another good point. So where were you in June of 1972 when now it was Tropical Storm Agnes by the time we got here?
I was probably working a summer job putting in swimming pools. And at the time, my wife and I were building our home in Hershey, and we were living with my in-laws in Jonestown. And as our house was being built, that occurred, and we didn't get any water in the basement. And I knew if we didn't get any water through Agnes, we were never going to get any water in the basement. So it was basically framed out at that time with a roof on, but nothing inside was done. So that's where I was in '72. And my father-in-law and I, his basement filled with water. So we ran into Lebanon to try to find a sump pump to pump it out. But he ended up with 2 feet of water in the basement living in Jonestown up on a hill. Water found its way, but was really shocked when I heard about the mines, because you were concerned about the men working there.
Absolutely. I mean, your father was still working for the company
Yeah,
at
he was
that
still
point.
working.
So that had to be kind of scary
And
times.
with my understanding was that the power went out, but the power was distributed from Lebanon, and the power was brought from Lebanon out here. And when the electricity went off in Lebanon, it shut down the pumps here, and of course, get out quick.
Right.
Because there was always water. They were pumping water out of there 24 hours a day, 350, every day of the year.
Wow.
They were pumping water. There was always water alongside the tracks running.
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you have anything else you'd like to ask? And this is Mike Weber.
Well, I was just going to note, in 1965, when you were working there in the summer, Cornwall produced 1,600 ounces of gold.
Gold.
So all year long, 1,600 ounces of gold, as well as 11,000 ounces of silver and 360 tons of cobalt. You didn't mention cobalt.
No, I didn't know about cobalt.
Yeah. That started kind of secretively back in the 20s into the 30s, and then they ramped up
Of
production.
course, gold wasn't worth as much then as it is now.
Yeah, but it was still worth
It's
a lot of
still
money.
worth a lot,
Yeah, millions of dollars. And 4,500 tons of copper.
Hmm.
And that's in addition, of course, to all the iron that was produced.
And the copper was taken out during the concentrator processing.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. And it was in the chalcopyrite mineral that you see back there.
Because we would stand, the conveyor belt would come in, and we had this, you could see the ore drop into the crusher.
Over at the concentrator
The
plant?
concentrator plant, yeah. And it's, trying to think, I think it would vibrate this way, and it was
Mhm.
kind of on a V,
Mhm.
and the rocks would come down and just be crushed. And then we also would be over, guess where, at the pellet plant, we had a giant wheel where the ore
Right.
would stick onto the wheel.
Right.
As it came by, you could see it all, and then,
And the little pellets tumbling.
right, the pellets were tumbling. So we worked in those areas.
So was it dusty over there when you were shoveling the ore back up onto the conveyor?
It probably was. I don't remember that it was.
Yeah.
But,
You don't
I
remember your
and I
nose
don't-
being-
And I don't remember that we wore any protective face masks
No,
at that time.
I don't think you did.
OSHA probably wasn't in operation in the 60s.
Yeah, OSHA came to be in the Nixon administration, so early 1970-ish. Wow.
But it was quite an experience, something I'll always remember.
And you ate lunch in the lunchroom?
Ate lunch in the lunchroom, yeah.
And
They had picnic tables, and I think there was something, a bell would ring underground, and then we knew it was lunchtime, and we'd all head for the lunchroom.
you ever had baked potatoes underground in the number
The
3
guys
line?
would bake, yeah, the guys had the heaters were there. and
Uh-huh.
when they would come down, first thing in the morning, if they wanted something hot, like soup, they'd put a can of soup, they'd open it up a little bit, put a can of soup on there, or potatoes, and then they'd come back at lunchtime and it would be hot,
Mhm.
cooked.
Mhm. And you went to the bathroom underground, right?
Yeah.
They had flushing toilets.
I don't remember the flushing toilets, but I think they must have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
One thing I didn't think about. The bathroom toilet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are the creature comforts that are
Yeah.
all involved in the mining
It was nice
process.
and bright. And I don't remember any pictures on the walls, but it
Yeah.
was a bright room, and
Yeah.
they had heat, so you could warm up if you were cold.
When you were handling the explosives, had you had any training on explosive safety that you can recall?
Just what.
Don't drop the box.
Just what Wimpy would say.
What would he say?
Just don't drop the box.
And
Be careful of the caps.
You kept the blasting cap separate.
Yeah, blasting caps were separate. We'd have dynamite on one side of the room, and the blasting caps would be in the other.
Yeah. Did you have to eliminate static electricity before you walked into that room?
I don't remember.
You
that
don't
we
remember?
did, no.
Okay.
No. But there was an overhead shaft. We'd have it loaded on a car, and I'd usually hand it up to him.
To Wimpy.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I don't think he was tall enough to reach it. To tell you the truth. So I'd hand it up, and he would store it. And then we'd go up and maybe rearrange or wait out the shift. We may have 20 minutes till the shift ended, and we'd wait out the shift there because our job was done.
yeah.
And I did what Wimpy did. If he sat down and rested for a while, I sat down and rested for a while.
Yeah, that's good. Good plan.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine most of those men are now have passed
Yeah, probably not with us any
that
longer.
were in the mine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a real privilege to actually meet a miner at Cornwall.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
So thanks for
Yeah.
coming in and doing this.
So thank you, and I enjoyed it. Hope some people enjoy listening to it sometime.
Oh, I think so. I think so. Thank you.
But you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was his, when he gave me his military information, you know, all that
Oh,
stuff,
wow.
every move. He wanted to be a pilot, but he and a bunch of other guys got washed out.
Yeah, that was a real tough thing.
Yeah, and then we went to being bombardier navigator, because he told me a couple of times when they were in Louisiana, they did low-level cruising and
Off the coast.
off the coast, and when they came in one time, they were, I don't know how many feet off the ground, but he said he thought they were going to go through the trees.
Oof.
They were that low.
Wow.
And another plane he was in, the captain gave it, the co-pilot, the wheel, so to say, and they started in a dive, and they came out of it, but the plane was so stressed that they had to take it out of service from the dive.
Wow.
So he said he nearly lost his life twice before he even got to the war. And I imagine a lot of people did.
Oh, yeah.
Had crashes here and
Yeah, training exercises. I mean, there are all kinds of photos of planes that are crashed all over the United States and training exercises.
19 combat missions in a B-26 Martin Marauder over southern France, bombing railroads and airfields. Transferred to Florence, Italy.
Was that in 43 that he was in South France?
Would have been probably 44.
44, okay.
In 45, he was assigned to an MP company.
Really?
And was over there for a while as an MP.
Huh.
I guess they had to find.
You weren't bombing things
They weren't
anymore.
bombing things.
Yeah, we weren't carpet bombing anymore.
What do you do
And
with
you needed-
what do you do with the men? So
And you
they-
also needed points in order to get out, and if you didn't have enough points, you had to stay. So now we're an occupation force.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Wow.
So he was taking care of drunk servicemen.
Yeah, probably.
Getting back to the mines, when Mike asked you about collecting rocks, some miners were doing it. Were you told not to collect rocks? Or it was just left up to you, you know?
I think it was left up to us.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't see many of those because I wasn't where the drillers were on our shift,
Oh, yeah, but you were watching the ore go by in the conveyor belt, right?
or there on the conveyor belts. Yeah, I was watching the ore, but didn't really give it a second thought.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Young, impressionable, ignorant kid.
that's really cool. Yeah.
No, I had a very similar job during my time in college. I had worked in a metal fabrication shop, and my uncle owned it. And I always did well in school, but certainly that was one of those things that I knew that if I didn't do well in school, that job would be available for me whenever. And that was just a little extra motivator that if I was studying for something, I thought, oh, do I really need to study it a little more? That was always the extra half an hour studying, because I knew that job would be waiting for me if I messed this up. So I understand that. And I think that was partially my father, who, the exact same thing, said, you know, okay, you've had some other jobs in food service, now I want you to have a laboring job because you need to know what work is.
Yeah, right, yeah. You know, you don't want to do that for the rest of your life.
Yes, like I said, I knew it was available to me, but it was
Hit the
good
hit the
motivator.
books and do well.
Yeah, I can hear that and see it myself, so I know what you're saying.
It was a goodly amount of gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
1,600 ounces.
now you had looked at the records during World War II, Mike, and how many miners and people for the company were out? I mean, they kept a running total.
Yeah, so the number 4 mine at one point had about 200 men on military leave. Interestingly, in the monthly reports that I was mentioning to you, they only kept tabs on who they lost from the number 4 mine because that was management's principal focus, developing and producing out of the number 4 mine. You didn't see comparable numbers for the number 3 mine, the concentrator plant, the open pit. And 6 of those men who served in the service were lost in action. And about half of the workers came back to work in the mines after they were discharged from the military, but not right away. It took about a year for them to staff back up after the war.
So in the 60s, about how many men were at the concentrator,
Well, I can tell you exactly.
number 4, number 3?
What
and
month
the
do you want
open
to know?
pit?
So,
So
just,
I think we may have had on our shift maybe 30 to 40 men.
yeah, in the number 3 mine.
And number 3, just on the development, pushing the shafts out.
Yeah, so in round terms, you had about 400 men assigned to the number 4 mine, had about 200 men assigned to the number 3 mine, and then depending whether the pit was working or not, and the machine shop and the electric shop, and then the concentrator had about 350 people. So at one point, Cornwall Division had over 1,000 employees. So that goes to what Mike was saying about how much influence it had in the community.
Yeah, the pit was out of service when I was
Oh, yeah.
in the mines.
Yeah. Well, actually, while you were there and you stepped out with Wimpy and looked, they were restarting mining in the open pit. It was called the East End ore body. And that's what they continued to mine for another year after the underground mines were closed in '72. They mined the East End ore body in the open pit until it closed the last day of June of 1973. So they would have been working on the haul roads to begin developing that East End ore body. So you probably saw some action associated with that when you stuck your head out. And it was the 5th level that came out.
Yeah. If you get a chance, something comparable to coming out here was taking a tour of the quarries
In Palmyra.
between Anvil and Palmyra.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I worked with the conservation district, and we did programs at the end. We had what did we call that? We had teams of kids competing against each other from various school districts.
Mhm.
But we'd also do field trips. On one of the field trips, we took the bus, a school bus,
Yeah.
I had heard about this down in the quarry.
down into the quarry, and she didn't want to. She was a female driver, and she didn't want to go because she didn't think she'd be able to get the bus out again.
Really?
And she called her boss, and her boss said, "It's okay." So we went down to the bottom,
Yeah.
because at one end there's a stream that runs into
Oh, yeah,
into
right.
the pit.
Yeah.
And they have the same water problem they did here. They got to keep pumping so the thing doesn't fill up with water.
Yeah. They pump millions of gallons a month, a day. Millions of gallons a day.
Yeah.
out of the number 3 mine, the open pit, the number 4 mine. It varied, seasonally.
Because the pipes were like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Concrete pipes were smaller, but they would wet that down a lot, and push it through so it could flow.
Yeah.
And that was under high pressure.
Get the muck out.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the concrete plasters and hearing the stones bounce around in the air. And a lot of that concrete they purchased from Lebanon Daily Mix. So they would dump it. And so you're right, they had to do it while the concrete plants were working so that they could get a delivery. But they also did it during day shift because they had the most workers during day shift. So they had enough people to get the concrete through the lines, because then you'd have to clean the lines afterwards, and all that kind of stuff. And that powdery substance that you were talking about, the explosives.
Yeah, I guess it was little pellets.
Yeah, that was like nitrogen fertilizer. So that's when they were using ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel, ammonium nitrate fertilizer and oil combinations as an explosive. So that's what you saw.
Yeah.
They had just gotten approval for that in the early 60s, in both the number 3 mine and the number 4 mine.
That came in bags.
Right. Well, those are fertilizer bags, basically.
And the dynamite came in boxes.
Right. And then they would have a little mixer, like a pug mill, that they would mix the fertilizer and the fuel oil together underground.
That was probably closer to where they were working.
And then they would pump it in a tube, and they would stick it in either a fabric satchel, tie it off, stick it in there, or they would just put it right in the hole.
But I think the guys who worked second and third shift, they'd use the sticks, the dynamite. And the guys on my shift, they'd use the pellets.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they were using both while you were there.
If they needed to get a rock out of their finger, couldn't use that.
ANFO.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some miners really preferred the dynamite over the ANFO. So I think the maximum I ever saw use of ANFO was about 30 to 40%, and the rest of it was dynamite. But to use the ANFO, they had to improve the ventilation in the mine.
Because of the petroleum.
Because of the buildup of explosive gases and the petroleum vapors that you would build up, kerosene.
Yeah, if I remember, I think you could hear one of the noises was the ventilation.
Yeah.
The fans.
Yes.
If the concrete wasn't running through the pipe.
Yeah.
That was pretty noisy.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So you worked 3 years in the mines. 1 year in number 4 in the conveyor, and then 2 years in the number 3 mine.
2 years over here.
So 3, okay.
I probably shouldn't have worked I graduated from college in '67, and I worked in the mines that summer because they took a 2-week vacation, and that's when my wife and I got married, took our honeymoon, and came back. I still had a week left, and then came back and worked in the mines until my teaching position opened.
Right.
And I think I gave myself a week in between. And then started teaching. And
Wow.
And at that time, I was going to be at Northside in Palmyra, and that was a new building, and it wasn't quite finished, so we had to go half days. The people at Pine had to share with Pine Street. Pine Street went in the morning from 9 to 12:30, and then I went or maybe it was 9 to 12 or 8:30, something in there, and then I went from 12:30 to 4. And at that time, we were living in Palmyra, so I'd walk home from school.
Oh, wow.
But that was half days for a month.
Did you teach science?
As I was in elementary ed,
Okay.
so I
So you taught everything.
I taught everything, and went through the process of teaming, being in your classroom for all subjects, and then we had teams of 3, where you would split up subjects, teams of 2, where you'd split up subjects, and then finally teams of 4. At that time, I taught social studies. So we had social studies, math, science and language arts.
Wow.
Other times I always liked science, so we would do, there were times when I was teaching science, we would do different things.
Yeah.
I remember we did a composting exercise, and we put it I was on the second floor at Northside, and they never used the north stairway, so I took all my cans with the compost in the ground, and we put it there at the end, the hallway, and after a week, I got a notice from the principal, got to move your cans. They smell too much.
Do you have questions for us?
No, I just had that question about the concentrator. Mainly, I didn't tell you why I wanted to know that.
Yeah. Like you said, it was with a
We're
railroad
doing
club.
the railroad, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to make those, and I found some little plastic bottoms for pots that we put a plant on, and I'm going to dig out the homicide, put these little planter things in there, and I and another guy, I have to talk to him about making those little walkways across the ponds.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
And that would-
we're not going to have the actual concentrator plants, but we're going to have some buildings that could be concentrator plants.
Mm-hmm.
I found one at Drod's train shop where cars can come underneath and either drop their load there or pick up a load, take it away. So I was talking to Mike. I said, hopefully that'll be finished by
Christmas time?
Christmas time, and if we want to have an open house, they're
Yeah.
going to have an open house in conjunction
We have it on the calendar, so,
with them.
yeah.
And
We're
they'll
hoping.
come in, and we'll have a better shot this year. We want to come in one entrance and go out another, so people don't double back and clog things up. But we've expanded at least twice the size of what we did have.
Really?
And we're going to add a Lebanon section.
Wow.
Dick Williams, who lives down here on Gatehouse Lane, he made a lot of our buildings. Well, he made the iron furnace.
Oh, he
building,
did a
saw
great
that.
job on the
But he's
modeling.
done the two railroad stations in Lebanon,
Oh, wow.
and we have the one up there now. He's done the paper box factory.
Okay.
He's done the Cornwall Lebanon Railroad office that's on between Chestnut and Walnut.
You know Pat Freeland.
Mhm.
His family owned the box factory.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was the
Yeah.
Kreiters. They called it the Boxy.
Huh.
And he's done a gas station out front in Cumberland, first in Cumberland. That used to be a kind of an oddball station, gas station there. He's done there's a school built. I think he's done Webster School. But we don't have that yet. That's our next section. Once the Lebanon we call it the concentrator section. That's the trains coming in, and it's going to have a loop around the concentrator, come down, and then we have a loop that comes around the Strickler Insurance Station.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the concentrator was a very important part of the mining operation.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people here don't think about the concentrator.
And how early it was.
Right?
That's the other thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What was it, 1904?
1904 they started, 1905 they started operations.
Right.
Yeah. Even before the loading pocket was built. So think of that.
Because
Yeah.
as a kid, we'd ride bike into Coleman's Park from Tunnel Hill Road, and we'd see the overhead aqueduct, more or less, that would take stuff up to the Smutsy, and then
The tailings launder, that was called.
there was a kind of a raceway along, what street would that be now?
Lehman Street?
Sand Hill Road.
Out Sand Hill Road, yeah.
Used to be something there made out of concrete block and stone and brick that had something to do with the concentrator, I think.
Well, they had
Maybe
a
it caught
tailing solution return line
maybe that was it.
that they
yeah.
sent back.
Yeah.
So the tailings went in high, and then the solution line.
Whatever overflow they had came down that and came back.
Yeah, well, they had to pump it out because, especially in wet times of the year, they would be dumping in more water than they could get rid of by evaporation and by infiltration.
Because there's a lake there now, I guess.
Yeah. Well, they thought they had that all filled in, but as we know, as we're talking about, the tailings continues to subside. So you might have been
Level
nice
at
and
one
level
time,
at one
yeah.
point, but no more.
My wife's cousin, Henry Arnold, I don't know if you know Henry Arnold, and George Christensen, I think they own all of that land.
Oh, really? Huh.
Because they put a fence around it. If you go,
Where the tailings are.
tailings are,
Yeah.
At the north side where Lions Lake is, that goes past part of the property. And
Mm-hmm.
they always said I'm a birder, so they always said it was good for birding, and with the lake in there, I wanted to get in and do some birding, but never got the chance.
Mhm. Yeah, in '64, they declared victory on the reclaiming of that pile. They had covered it all up. They had planted rye, grass seed, and vegetation was starting to grow, and so they were optimistic, and I was thinking, yeah, good luck. You know, jobs that I'm familiar with, it takes decades to reclaim those tailings ponds. And, you know, they were doing it literally overnight in like 2 years, so,
I mean,
Well,
look
Bruce,
how long it's taken for this.
yeah.
Yeah, Bruce and I have walked on the tailings for Iron Valley.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then on the back nine, you see all those depressions. That's where the
Yeah, well, I have photos
Side
of those.
scraters, yeah.